I think most of us know how vehicles operate. Well, some people are better at it than others if you've been on the road lately. You just kind of get in the car, turn the key, it starts up, put it in gear, and you go. But if you know a little bit more about automobiles, you know it's not that simple. There's a lot of complicated things in a vehicle that make it run the way it should. Sometimes we take for granted the ease at which we are able to do some things like operate a vehicle. But with a vehicle, there are several things that are important. One is having the fuel and able to get it started, having power from a battery in order to get it ignited, having the engine operate properly. But there's a lot of people maybe that know how to do that, but really, although you have a lot of potential, you have a lot of power, you really don't go anywhere until you put it in gear. And that's the difficult part about life, that we may know a lot of things, but what the challenge is for us, especially as Christians, is what we call the transmission. The transmission in the car has a lot of gears, again, depending on how many different gears it has. Some are 4-speed, some are 6-speed. Does anybody remember the old 3-speed? You have to shift it yourself. That's a whole different thing. But here these gears have to work together, and if they're not really working together, you're not going anywhere. You're not even really doing what the vehicle was designed to do. You almost get the feeling like some people walk onto the used car lot and there's a very old car, but it looks good. And they may be able to sit in it, and it feels comfortable. And they can even turn on the radio and it's got an upgraded sound system. But if the engine doesn't work, it's not really going to fulfill the function a vehicle is designed to do, is to take you from one place to the other. We've been talking about sin, and quite often, maybe even in our own minds, we still always lean back to the idea that sin is when I do something I know is wrong. I've read God's word, and there's a lot of thou shalt not do a lot of things, and so by us violating that and transgressing that, that's when it becomes sin. And it seems like a lot of our laws in society have to do with thou shalt not, and probably don't focus so much on what you ought to do, what you should do, what you've been called to do, what opportunities you have to do. So think about Jesus when it comes to this. Now, there are some places where it talks about that Jesus was tempted in every way like we are, yet he was without sin. But more often than not, even as we study through the Gospels, we find out, even as Peter would say in Acts chapter 10, that Jesus is one who went about doing good. He was known for the things that he did, not for the things that he avoided. Now, again, we know that Jesus overcame the sin of being tempted and doing things he should not. So, I'm not at all saying that Jesus failed, because he was perfect in that way. But he was known amongst the people as someone who lived a certain way, and people took notice of that. And so when we talk about sin, again, we can spend a lot of time talking about things we should not do. The challenge for us, first of all, even to teach on it, much less think about it, is it can be overwhelming. I mean, you thought there was a long list of things thou shalt not do? I mean, you don't even want to start thinking about all the potential things that we could be doing. I mean, that can be overwhelming. And so today, the purpose is not to overwhelm, and the purpose is not really for anyone to go away feeling guilty. Well, I've just not done all I could be doing. But maybe it's just for us to be able to look at our lives and to say, what has God called me to do? What are some things that maybe I could engage in, right? So God's given me his word. He's given me his spirit. He's given me opportunities. He's given me talents. He's given me relationships with other people. He's given me time. Maybe he's given money or possessions. So there's these things I have. Now what? Am I going to be able to, put the power together, the engine, to the transmission of me being able to do what God has called me to do so that we can actually get somewhere in the kingdom of God. And so it's a matter of us working together in this. And so a verse that maybe would be familiar, maybe if we were going to say, what is the verse that really talks about this, is in James chapter 4. And there he says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do, here's something I know I should be doing. It's a way I should be acting, something I should be saying, a way I should be living, the way I should be treating people, the way I serve. But if I fail to do what I know I ought to do, what I've been called to do, again, maybe just reading the scriptures, not looking for all the verses, and there are some verses. One example may be the one another verses, right? It's not the negative stuff. It just says you should love one another. You should serve one another. You should forgive one another. But I don't do all the bad things. I don't do the things I shouldn't do. But are you doing the things you should do? And so sometimes we can overlook those things. But when we don't do what we know we ought to be doing, what God has called us to, what we've been designed to do, what our purpose is, when we don't do that, he says this is sin. And so this is something we look at in our own lives. Again, this would be super hard for us to judge other people because we don't know what their motives are and what they are doing. But I look at my own life to say, what am I doing? How am I living? How am I acting? And so hopefully as we go through just a few verses that demonstrate this and help us to see how this works together, in Hebrews 13 and verse 16, do not neglect doing good and sharing. With such sacrifices, God is pleased. So we don't want to overlook this idea of doing good, of sharing with other people, of giving of ourselves, of seeking out these opportunities. So don't neglect it, because it's easy to happen, isn't it? I mean, I know we get busy in life. I know sometimes we can think a lot about ourselves and not so much about others. So Philippians 2 addresses that a lot. Don't just think about your own interests, but think about other people. The things that they need, what they're going through. Think about their pain and the things that they require in their life. So these are look what it says, the sacrifices with which God is pleased. And it's not the only list there is. There's other things we do to please God and to offer a sacrifice, but this is one way. And so sometimes we would say, see, the word sacrifice, I mean, maybe we don't even like that, because that means, again, it's the dying to ourselves, humbling ourselves, thinking about others, not just thinking about me. So sacrifice, it doesn't sound like it's going to be easy. Like there wasn't really any sacrifices that were easy, otherwise it wouldn't be a sacrifice. Even in the Old Testament, when they every year had to give a sacrifice to God as a sin offering, it was their best. It was the if they could call it that, the perfect, not that any animal was necessarily perfect, but it was the very best they had. The sacrifice, what they had to give up. That wouldn't be easy. And so this way of living is challenging and it's difficult. And yet the Bible encourages us to keep growing, moving forward in this. James 1 in verse 27. Again, a familiar verse, I think, for most. Religion that God our Father accepts, pure and faultless, is look after orphans and widows in their distress. I mean, we could think about many illustrations, parables even, in the Gospels where Jesus talks about thinking about other people, serving other people, giving for other people. And when we neglect to do that, those people were not looked upon with favor. As a matter of fact, Jesus condemned them. And so that was quite different for the people to think about back then. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, I think they were really, really big on, these are the things I don't do. I know the law of God, I don't do this. Well, what are you doing? I don't know. I'm just spending most of my time trying not to do the things I shouldn't. Well, how are you helping people? I just have to focus on how I'm not going to hurt people. Not really helping anybody. And so maybe we could talk about how this would work out very practically in our lives. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 42, by the way, if you can't see it, the cheat verses on the water bottle. I put it on there so I wouldn't forget it. But there it says, whoever gives a cup of cold water in my name will not lose their reward. There's something about just helping somebody in a very simplistic way. And what he is saying here is he's not limiting it to just this one thing. There's many ways we can serve and help other people. How do you know that? I mean, what would a legalist say? The Bible says a cup of cold water. You've got a bottle. It doesn't count. Oh, really? Well, something else that may even be a little more challenging. I've even got a bottle of water up here. I would share it with you, but it wouldn't do any good, at least according to this verse, because it's not cold. It's kind of room temperature, right? So we look at it. By the way, those illustrations are supposed to be funny, in case you were kind of wondering if I've actually lost my mind, and I have, but funny, okay. So, yeah, we're not trying to be legalists here. We're just trying to say, how can I help people? How can I serve people? How can I give to people? Or is it, I've got a cup of cold water, but I want a cup of cold water. I've got a cup of cold water, but, I don't really need it now, but what if I need it an hour or two? What if I need it in a day? How am I going to do that? Right? So I better keep this for myself. No one will know I've got it. But I got my cup of cold water. But he's saying, no, giving a cup of cold water may be a sacrifice. It may be giving up saying, I guess in the future I'm going to have to trust God because I'm going to give that away. Does that make sense? Because I don't think there were people back then walking around with cases of water where they could give all kinds of water away. Maybe it's your one and only cup of water. But you're thinking about, how can I give to other people? So there are different ways that this is illustrated. You remember the parable of the talents? One man was given 5, another man 2, and another man 1. What did the man with the 1 talent, you remember what he did with his money? He went out and he spent it on himself. I mean, how wrong is that? Well, he didn't do that. He was so careless, he lost it. And he had nothing to show for it. He didn't do that either. What did he do with what he had? Nothing. He just did nothing. And the outcome of the story is not that happy, right? He was lost, separated from God. Why? Not because of anything he did. It's what he failed to do. Oh, in case you didn't quite get that, Jesus thought, well, maybe I should give another. It's the same chapter in Matthew 25. The parable of the sheep and the goats. You remember? When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. Those aren't things that you do that are wrong. That's just a failure to do what is right. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of teaching when it comes to this idea of how we should live. It's just not avoiding the negative. It's how we can do the positive. The rich man and Lazarus, you remember, a guy's very wealthy, and at his door there was a beggar. And he was sick. He had sores. And even the dogs came, licked his sores. He was in a very desperate situation. He did not get that way because of the rich man. I don't think that he was like, I've given him some kind of a disease and, I'm treating him very poorly and every time I walk by him, I kick him and, I'm going to try to keep him down. And no, it had nothing to do with the rich man. You remember the rich man? Was he commended or was he condemned? And it wasn't for something that he did. It was because he failed to care for somebody else when he could have cared. He was right there at the doorstep. He was a man of affluence. He had the ability. He had opportunity. He had this right in front of him. He didn't care. And so again, negative consequences. And probably the most famous of all illustrations, the Good Samaritan. Right? Remember the priest and the Levite? Well, they just walked by on the other side. Well, what did they do that was wrong? They didn't beat the guy up. They didn't steal from him. They may not even have wished bad on him as they walked by. What was their sin? We would just say, if we could ever make a lesson out of it, failure to engage, failure to get involved, failure to help when the opportunity was there. And again, to me, the Good Samaritan is a good example of with such sacrifices, because maybe that wouldn't be easy for religious leaders to stoop down to that level. Maybe putting their own life in jeopardy, and maybe getting all dirty and taking up maybe their precious time when they could be taking care of their local flock, their local churches. But to stop and help this man, maybe a great sacrifice. It seemed like a great sacrifice even to the Samaritan, but he was willing to do it. So we're just talking about, it's not going to be easy. And maybe that's why it's easy to avoid it, not think about it, continue on as we've been living, just maybe more self-focused. So John, one of the apostles, obviously spent a lot of time with Jesus, listening to what he was saying, but maybe also watching a lot of what Jesus did. He said, if anyone has material possessions, if you have the ability, if you have what is needed, and you see a brother or sister that's in need, so here I've got something they don't have and something they need and something that I can certainly give up. Maybe even if I can't give up, I would sacrifice it so I could help them. What do they need? And if you remember the story of the Good Samaritan, the one who did what was right is the one who had compassion or mercy. The one who, here he says, has pity. If you have no pity on that person, so here's a good question. How can the love of God be in that person? You say you love God? And this is kind of what, it kind of brings together all we've been talking about. You remember James 1, about pure and faultless religion is what? It's to care, it's to share, it's to have pity, to give of yourself for others that are struggling, that are hurting. So again, there's this idea in our own minds. How does this apply to us? How does this work? How can I make this practical? In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience. So again, Peter's saying, another way we do this is by speaking up. Maybe it's speaking up for people that have questions, that have doubts, speaking up for people that don't have faith. Speaking up about Christ. We could say, well, I never take the Lord's name in vain. Well, do you ever proclaim the name of the Lord? Right? That's kind of the exact opposite. Those bad words don't come out of my mouth. Well, do good words come out? We could speak a lot about words, because sometimes when people are self-centered, what do? They speak about themselves. They speak in a way that would build themselves up, that would benefit them. And kind of one of my favorite verses, I think, that explains it is this one. If anyone has been stealing, so stop that, right? It's wrong. Don't steal anymore. But what should they do? Just stop stealing? Because then what are you doing? You're spending most of your time thinking about stealing. And it's just so easy for the bad habit to come back. So just stop stealing. But to replace that, work. Work hard. But work hard for what? So that you can get everything that you used to steal for. I can get it by working. It's going to still be all about me. No, but do something useful with your own hands, that you may have something to share with those in need. Like, that's the reason you're working now. It's not to pay off so that you can get more stuff for yourself. You're working so you can share it with others. So the idea is there's a lot more than just stop getting stuff, because that's selfishness. The idea is, how can I give to others? How can I serve others? How can I help others? So if you've been taking for yourself, what he's saying is start giving to other people. So let's apply this to other things. If I've got a problem with gossip, I can't just say I'm going to stop gossiping about people, because that's just putting people down. And part of my problem is I like talking anyway, and maybe I like talking about people. So instead of gossiping, talk about people. But talk about them in such a way you build them up and not tear them down. So instead of gossiping, you are encouraging people. You're praising people. You're thanking people. I'm going to talk behind your back, but the things that I talk about are going to be building you up, not tearing you down. Right? So if I've had a problem with lying, it's not just quit lying. That's not the solution. Yes, you need to quit lying, but what you need to do, I need to start telling the truth. Or maybe I've been so afraid of sharing my faith, so I need to overcome that fear. But the solution would be for me to share Christ with other people. Look for those opportunities. There's all kinds of practical ways that we can look to say, what is the opposite of what I have been doing? The sin that I've been committing. If I was going to turn that all the way around, not just stopping the sin, but what can I replace it with that would turn it now into a positive? And that's the way we can overcome. We can stop doing the negative by putting something else in its place that would really be the exact opposite. And that I guess, is what I would call the transformation. Those are the gears. That's the transmission of almost literally changing from one thing to the exact opposite. A change in life. So that now you're doing what God has called you to do. So Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9 and 10, let us not become weary in doing. Don't get tired. Don't get exhausted. Don't get drained out. Don't feel like giving up. Don't become weary in it. Because at the proper time, you will reap a harvest if we don't give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity. So again, we don't necessarily have to always be out looking for opportunities. Opportunities can be looking for us. They'll be there. Maybe we've just overlooked them, but here's our opportunities that come up. As we have opportunity. That means you don't have to do everything, because sometimes that can be overwhelming. How can I help everyone in this church? How can I encourage everybody in this world? How can I, be a blessing to everybody in my workplace? Well, maybe you can't, because it's just overwhelming. It's just too much. You can't help everybody, but you can help somebody. Right? So it's as we have opportunity. Do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. So this is a way that we work. Instead of being negative, to being positive. Instead of tearing down, we're building up. Instead of discouraging, we're blessing people. And this is what God has called us to do. To spin it around. So now we are living the positive influence in the world. Remember, Jesus said, let your light shine. That's positive. That's what lights do. They're positive. Let your light shine. Doesn't matter if it's the way you live, or the way you talk, or the attitude, or the motive. Let your light shine that you may glorify your Father in heaven. People will see that. They'll recognize that, just as they did in Jesus. He fulfilled the will of God in doing good work while he was in the world. And it was his sacrifice that brings us life. And we always give an encouragement at the end. If there's anything we can do to encourage you, to pray with you, or if today you want to surrender your life to Christ, be baptized into Jesus, there's always that opportunity. We're going to sing a song that, now's the time. Now's the time to make a decision, to do the right thing. If you need to come to Christ, we're here. Let's sing this song while we pray and while we plead.